And joining us today, we have Kevin McNew. He's the chief economist with the Farmers Business Network. And Kevin, appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us here today. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Well, let's dive right in, Kevin. There is obviously a lot going on around the world and a lot impacting agriculture right now, from supply chain issues to the war in Ukraine to skyrocketing input costs, you name it. There's a lot of things out there. Just to start us off, what is your just kind of overall view right now of where these markets are sitting and where the farm economy is sitting right now as we enter spring planting season?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a coming together of several forces. I mean, we've been in a bullish market for really the last 18 months. And there were several things that kind of led grain markets to kind of reverse course after touching $3 back about 18 months ago in August 2020. It was really kind of an inflection point. We had problems with the US growing season back when we had a derecho windstorm that took out a wide swath of crop. We had China step into the world market in a big way and buy a bunch of corn and really signal that their appetite for corn or their need to source corn from the world market has changed quite dramatically. And then on top of that, you've had growing season hiccups in the Northern Hemisphere last year in the Canadian prairies, big losses in wheat, in barley, the northern plains of the US. And then this latest growing season in South America struggling as well, all with the backdrop of really, really strong demand signals. And that was the world we were trading really up until about 3 weeks ago when this war broke out. And this war just really added more fuel and to this kind of smoldering fire. And now we have a grain market that is completely in a roaring fire. And I don't see anything in sight that kind of puts this fire out in the near term. So, your question about how are farmers doing? Well, there's a bit of trepidation. I think economically they're a little pinched right now as they face high input costs, but I firmly expect grain prices, especially for 22 growing season prices, to start to accelerate because of the imbalance we're going to have on the global supply and demand sheet.
Well, Kevin, I know as well, FBN, you guys released the Economic Outlook report on the state of ag at Commodity Classic. And, a lot of different things in that report, a lot of different things you hit on. But, we talk about grain prices, we think about the war in Ukraine. Obviously, it feels like wheat is at the epicenter right now of our market moves. And, again, we saw wheat, we've seen wheat sharply higher again here a couple sessions. So, I mean, it just feels like that is kind of what is the big force right now kind of pulling on the rest of the grains. Would you agree?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Wheat has become one of really two barometers of the tensions in Eastern Europe, oil being the other one. And they literally are moving in lockstep with each other, specifically around any sort of headlines that potentially fuel more uncertainty or fuel more thoughts of the war escalating or prolonging, or any sort of hope of tensions easing and a normalization happening. I'm in the camp that thinks this is a long-term effect, that we're not going to normalize this situation anytime soon. Not that I'm a political analyst or have any great insights into Russia, but I think we can all kind of read the last 25 days and say, what we thought Russia was under Putin seems dramatically different than what is going on today. And so I do firmly expect, Ukraine to be out of the world market for wheat and corn this coming year. They have a winter wheat crop that's in the ground, but the prospects of them harvesting that are slim to none. And then the ability for them to plant in the next 40 days. This is their planting window up to May 1. There are limited, if any, resources to even make that a feasible possibility. And given all the constraints they have, I don't see it happening. So I firmly expect Ukraine to be out of the market, Russia to be really handicapped and kind of elevated to a non-trading partner in the world. And I think that lost supply, which right now is hyper focused on wheat, but I think it also filters through into corn as we think about Ukraine's importance into China. China is going to need a lot of corn going forward, and clearly Ukraine this year before the war was able to fill some of those demands from China. And so, I think the U.S. is in a very favorable position. So I do think farmers are going to see higher prices. They're going to have really good profits. Maybe not as good as last year, but I think we'll see commodity prices for 22 pricing or 22 crops catch up.
Another thing as well, we think about a shorter South American crop, especially on the soybean side. We've been seeing exports to China and unknown, really just kind of, we've seen a little bit of a lull here in March, but overall just been very strong. And we think about heading into spring planting here in the US. I've heard talk of farmers shifting acres around. You have $16 plus soybeans, you have $7 corn. What's going to happen in some of those fringe areas? What have you heard in your travels talking to farmers? Are we going to see a big shift in acres? Is it going to impact us here as we get into the heart of spring planting season, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, Jesse, we're right in the middle of our acreage survey. We've done this historically and been very, very good about kind of giving our farmers the guidance ahead of the USDA report on March 31st. And we're still into the early stages of that survey. We'll have the final numbers out next by the end of this week. What I can kind of tell you a little bit is you're right. There is some shifting going on. One thing that stands out to me, and you'll appreciate this being in the South, is cotton is really going to steal a lot of acres. And I know cotton, we don't think about, in big ways necessarily, because it's not at the elevated level of corn and beans, but, pretty much every place we look that grows cotton, farmers are signaling they're going to grow more cotton. And so I do think cotton is going to become a bigger part of the story about this acreage shift than we're giving it today. But you're right. Corn probably is backing down a little bit. Beans is backing up. In the northern plains, as we see data from those areas, spring wheat is kind of on the fence. Spring wheat prices are really strong, but it's going to have to go up against soybean prices that are really strong too. So I'm going to hold back my judgment on final numbers. I do think they are going to show some pretty decent changes. But overall, my message to farmers right now is, with the big loss of supplies in the world market and this basically huge loss, I don't see anything that USDA says on March 31 derailing the strength in the market. Normally, we would maybe be a little more cautious and maybe say, yeah, big shifts in corn versus beans or anything like that could certainly derail markets. But I just don't think that's going to happen this year because of the massive loss in supply we're talking about from Eastern Europe.
Well, Kevin, as well, I've heard from a lot of farmers. We think about fertilizer challenges, things like that here as we get into spring planting season. But I've heard from a lot of farmers, they're not necessarily as worried about 2022. They're either they have it, they've already fall applied, or they have everything they need for this year. They're worried more about 2023. Are you hearing some of those concerns as well?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, some farmers we talked to or done polls around, certainly they were able to get a lot of stuff locked in for fall needs. We had a wide open fall, so warm, so dry across a wide swath of the country. So we know there's a lot of fertilizer going on the ground in the fall. And a lot of the guys that we talked to at that time said, yeah, I was able to get it get it priced June, July, August, well ahead of the price strength that started to materialize in September. But I think you're right. I think as this story continues and persists into the next growing season, 23, it's going to be a much different paradigm because everyone's going to be on the same playing field of seeing sky high fertilizer prices. Glyphosate prices have shown no signs of backing down. Everything is more expensive. And I think that's the message we have. So it's going to be a little bit like a treadmill for farmers. They're going to look at one side of the equation, the commodity prices, and say, oh yeah, I got 750 corn or whatever. But man, the costs are just not going to give up anytime soon. So I don't see that derailing anytime soon as well. So our advice in this situation is, commodity prices, especially for new crop, are a little slow to adjust, where your input costs are moving rapidly, and we would encourage you to be locking those in. So as painful as it is, get them locked in. Get them available, because availability will be a constraint, but maybe slow roll a little bit of your forward sales because we do think more strengths on the horizon.
Well, Kevin, we covered quite a bit in a short amount of time. Any other final thoughts you have for our listeners here today?
I mean, my last bit of recommendation is, we have, some really good profits that are from last year. Farmers a little bit hesitant about this year. We did some polling around large equipment investment, and what we saw is large farmers in particular were really going to be eager about investing in large equipment versus medium to small farmers. Every farmer needs to be looking at every element of their budget, fertilizer, seed, chem, look at that ROI because everything's getting more expensive. And so I really think it's important to use technology to use things that can basically return ROI to your operation because everything's going to be inflated for some time in the future.
Well, great stuff, and we appreciate the time. And I know farmers, if they want to learn more about the Farmers Business Network, they can go to FBN.com. With that, Chief Economist Kevin McNew with the Farmers Business Network. Appreciate the time today, sir. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.